to meet my mum with the Archbishop. My mum was very reluctant to meet him, and it took a lot of convincing. I really thought that Jeff Nemeth wanted to give our family closure, and he committed to doing so. He initially said he would come to our home because she is not okay at this point dealing with Reshall's loss, and he would bring the Archbishop through. That changed over from week to week. The story changed, and then he requested that we have the meeting at the deanery in Johannesburg. He led us on for about 2 months. I'm just going to narrow down the story. He led us on for about 2 months, sent me endless messages putting in writing that he had mandate to settle Reshall's matter, to the extent saying that he had gone to Detroit and the decision makers had given him the mandate to settle Reshall's matter and put this to closure. You know, we followed up with him because it was leading close to the final weeks of him leaving, asking him, what's happening with the meeting? We haven't heard anything from you, concerned that you would be leaving the country soon. He says, not to worry, I can assure you, once we discuss the settlement that we're offering your family and closure to move forward, there's not going to be any extended negotiations in regard to Reshall's matter. He's made us believe that he's taking responsibility for this. He's made us feel that Ford is sorry for what happened to Reshall. And I honestly felt that because of him and involving God and the Archbishop, that Jeff Nemeth and Ford are finally now accepting their wrongs and redeeming themselves from everything that's happened and would give our family closure. We had a meeting with him last week, Friday. In that meeting, there was discussions about what happened with Reshall, what happened reaching us to the point of starting the media campaign, more putting the Archbishop in light of where we are with the matter. We then came to a discussion of Jeff Nemeth's offer. He told us that they're offering us a car. And my mum was very emotional prior to that. She was crying and she kept trying to convince him that Reshall was such a good person and he would have never did anything wrong. She asked them, why did Ford make rumors that Reshall committed suicide? I haven't seen my mum cry like that, not even at Reshall's funeral. I think she was so emotional, and it was hard seeing her like that. When we led to the discussion of what Jeff Nemeth offered our family, he said he's offering us a car, and perhaps I mentioned that Reshall's heart was in sort of homes for kids, because the Archbishop asked me, what are we doing to keep Reshall's memory alive? And I mentioned that we are doing some charity work because this is where Reshall's heart was, and Native VML did stuff in honor of Reshall. So to cut all of that short, basically we reached a point where Jeff gave us this offer of the car, and he said they would pay off the claim for Reshall's Kuga that was burnt. And he then said further evidence has arisen, and he told my mum that Reshall was shot in his head. And an officer told them this, and the officer told a witness, and he said there were statements to that effect. My mum completely lost all her composure, and she cried, and she asked me, is this true? And I said, no, it's not. And then I addressed Jeff, and I said, look, you've had access to Reshall's autopsy, so I'm not understanding how you would say that he was shot, because that rules out completely any shooting or foul play. And he basically responded saying, look, he hasn't had full access to the autopsy, and could I assist him with a few documents to help them move forward and take responsibility and clear out this rumor of Reshall being shot. That's how things have unfolded, but in a very summarized version for our limited time.
Before Mr. Motona, before you speak, how long is it, when did your brother die?
4th of December 2015, a year and 5 months ago.
Okay. Matwana, would you like to take over?
I'd just like to give a perspective on how the manipulation of Renisha and her mother have occurred by Ford. That culminated in Jeff Nemeth stating that he couldn't proceed further with settlement negotiations due to the fact that Reshall had in fact been shot in the head. So I'd just like to take a timeline to indicate how the manipulation by Ford to culminate in that statement has occurred. Initially, as Renisha has told you, the undertaking from Jeff Nemeth is that they would ultimately like to settle the matter, and as a token of goodwill from our side is that we were in fact to tone down the media campaign. So if everybody's noted, probably in the last month or two, there's been a lot less coverage excuse me, in relation to the matter. That was done purposely at the request of Ford. Obviously Ford is trying to portray to the public that the matter is resolved and that the media storm has subsided to some extent. But in reality, Ford's actions are blatantly apparent in that the last meeting that we in fact had with Jeff Nemeth and his legal counsel, it took place on the 15th of February. At the meeting, Jeff, as well as the legal counsel, asked us for clarity specifically on certain medical legal aspects which were contained in the post-mortem report. This is the very same post-mortem report that they now refer to with Renisha, alleging that there was a gunshot wound to the head. Ford, therefore, from our perception that we visually saw them in possession of the said document, they had the post-mortem in their report, and they in fact quoted from the said report to us. Page 2, they queried the toxicology reports. So the various angles that it can be seen that Ford takes to avoid liability. Questioned page 2 of the post-mortem report, which was their query which they levelled at us, relating to the toxicology results of Reshall. They then further queried the noted contents of Reshall's lungs, which was contained on page 4 of the post-mortem report. Now, despite what Nemeth had discussed with us at that meeting, during Friday's meeting that Renisha has alluded to in terms of the settlement negotiations, he then has the audacity to then bring up the point that in fact Reshall had been shot in his head. And in my opinion, it is an absolute insult to one's intelligence and a reflection on Ford's ridiculous attempt to try and lay blame anywhere but to accept responsibility themselves for what occurred in terms of the Kuga vehicles. Now, we have in our possession the post-mortem report or portions thereof. There is a 2-and-2 statement, which is an expert statement for admissibility purposes to court. Now, just to put into context, now we are aware that Jeff Nemeth and Shabishi Moratoa, his senior legal counsel, in fact have the said document in their possession. And I'll read verbatim from the conclusions reached in that post-mortem report. And just to indicate that Jeff Nemeth, despite reading this, despite having it in his possession, then is as callous as to try and manipulate Renisha and her mother and put them through that additional trauma of alleging that he was in fact shot in his head. So I will quote the conclusion reached by the coroner verbatim. The chief post-mortem findings made by me on the body were: number 1, the body is severely charred. Number 2, no internal or discernible external injuries with no discernible evidence of a shooting. Number 3, the blood is cherry red in colour and the trachea is lined by a large amount of soot. The cause of death is therefore noted as severe charring. So, 2 specific aspects emanate from that. Number 1, there's clearly no bullet wounds detected or any gunshot wounds detected in any respect whatsoever. Secondly, a large amount of soot was detected in the trachea, indicating that in fact Reshall was alive during the fire. That is indicated as occurring in his trachea that he was in fact breathing during the fire. And not, as Ford alleges, now that he was in fact murdered, as per a gunshot wound. So I'd like to clarify the aspect why they have the impression that possibly there's a gunshot wound which emanated right in the initial stages of the discovery of the body. It is quite graphic, and we have not to date, in fact, discussed it at length with Renish's mother to try and keep things on a civil level. However, a hole, in fact, appeared behind the right ear of Reshall. That was detected by the first police officials that, in fact, arrived on the scene. He, in a layman's perspective, stated that it might, in fact, indicate that it was a gunshot wound. The coroner was then specifically instructed to assess and analyze that wound to establish the cause of the wound. It was subsequently determined to be due to the intense heat of the blaze, which causes cracking of the skull. I won't elaborate on the specific mechanism by which it occurs, but it is in fact heat related and is a common occurrence in the burning of bodies that would occur. Now, in terms of Ford's liability in that regard, it's our submission that Ford, through the mechanism of Jeff Nemeth, has put forth in writing that they are mandated to settle this matter with the Jimmy family, in writing. At the same meeting, he then, contrary to that, says they cannot proceed with further settlement meetings because, in their opinion, Reshall was in fact murdered, the gunshot wound to the head. That contradiction I cannot explain. Only Jeff Nemeth can explain to you why that might be. And in my legal opinion, he has admitted legal liability for the death of Reshall, number one, firstly by placing it in writing, and secondly by the fact that he is mandated by Ford headquarters to make an offer of settlement. Why would that offer of settlement be made if they suspected that he was in fact murdered? Doesn't make sense. Final point is in terms of the manner in which Ford has conducted themselves. One of a forensic investigator who was tasked by insurance companies to assess 3 Ford Kuga vehicles that had burnt. Ford Kuga vehicles were detained at a specific locked premises. Upon his attendance at that premises to assess the vehicles, 2 of them were missing. That seems to be a modus operandi, that every time somebody wishes to inspect a vehicle, it is either seized by Ford or insurance companies take it, and no independent assessment of any of these vehicles has been conducted, save for that of Reshall's. Possibly then I can hand over to Dr. Klatzer in respect of the run of events, as well as more from the medical legal aspects as to how Ford has attempted to deceive and allay the public opinion of how they have dealt with the matter.
Dr. Klatzer, over to you.
Thank you. Now, this is an extraordinary example of an investigation which has been marred by deceitfulness from Ford from the word go. The original car, shortly after the fire, was examined by 3 parties, one of whom was appointed by Ford, Mr. Anthony Young. In that, they reached a consensus that the fire had started in the front of the car and the probable cause was a short circuit. Now, that's quite important given the history of this car, because there's a history of electrical faults in the car which Ford had ignored. Now we have the situation where 3 people came to a reasoned conclusion, having examined the car under the best possible conditions then, that there was indeed a short circuit in the very place where the fire had started. And that's quite important. Subsequently, Ford issued a statement purporting to come from their so-called fire expert in America, Mr. Engel, who, without seeing the car, based only on photographs, came to the conclusion that the fire had started at the back of the car. Now, the reasons given were not clear at that stage, but subsequently, after we met with Nemeth, he finally brought Mr. Engel, who demanded a second look at the car, and of course, not surprisingly, had reaffirmed his findings that he found in America. The difficulty with that is that the reasoning he gave us was wrong in so many elementary ways that I stand astounded at the fact that Ford could use somebody as incompetent as Mr. Engel to actually investigate a fire of this importance. It failed to take into account the basic fire investigative principles that are drummed into any first-year student who would want to study the causation of fires, and were simply ignored in the need to pursue Ford's policy of denying that the fire started in the front of the car. One of the things, obviously, is that one starts in looking at a fire by trying to find out where the most damage is. But in a case of a motor car such as that, quite often what will happen is that the petrol tank will catch alight, and the damage will be significantly increased in the region of the petrol tank rather than where the fire actually started, which was in the front. So that's the first problem which Mr. Engel failed to take into account. The second issue was that there were actually eyewitnesses to the beginnings of the fire who placed it full square as having started in the front under the dashboard. So faced with that sort of information, Mr. Nemeth decided that maybe if you tell a lie often enough, it will become the truth. And he and his company have continued to put forward this falsehood that the fire started at the back. The level of the deceitfulness comes in the fact that their own agent, namely Mr. Young, came to the conclusion that the fire started at the front of the car. And that I have confirmed in writing by the other parties who were there, in fact in affidavit form, that Young had done this. This concession that the fire started in the front of the car, which clearly didn't suit Ford. Ford had then gone to enormous lengths to keep Mr. Young's report away from us. I've asked for it on many occasions. Mr. Nemeth seems to think that the only thing that should happen is that the family should give him information, but that Ford is immune from giving any information back. And that has been a hallmark of the behavior of Ford and Nemeth throughout this proceedings. So we have the situation now where the most likely cause of the fire in a car with previous electrical problems is that short circuit under the front. And Nemeth thinks that if you continue, he's obviously read the works of Joseph Goebbels quite significantly, and he thinks that if you continue to propagate a lie, somebody somewhere will believe it. Well, I'm afraid to tell you, Mr. Nemeth, that's not going to happen. We then get to the situation where we've got the body in the car. Now, the one thing I can tell you as a matter of certainty is that a layperson looking at a body in a burning car is not going to be able to diagnose a bullet wound unless the body is not at all burnt. And if there is a specific request to the pathologist doing the postmortem to look for a bullet hole in the skull, which is where this person alleges to have seen it, that would have been found with no doubt whatsoever. The first thing that happens is that you open the skull, you peel back the membranes that are on the bone, and you will see the bullet hole, and you'll see it on the outside as you peel off the skin. So we can take it as an absolute certainty that there is no bullet hole in the skull. But again, that story has metamorphosed over time, because we've got Mr. Nemeth kicking off the story by saying that Mr. Jimmy committed suicide. So he's dreaming up version after version all of which have one golden thread that goes through all of them. They're all designed, however dishonest they are, they're designed to take the blame away from Ford. Now, the Postmortem report has been in Nemeth's hands. Nemeth claimed in court papers, which I have seen, that the family have been uncooperative with him. That is a blatant lie, I'm afraid to say, Mr. Nemeth, because at all the meetings that I've had, which is the phone meeting that I had with him, I spoke to him on the telephone, and in a meeting that we had with him in Bedford View, where we outlined what we would like from the company, I made the offer to Nemeth that we will hold nothing back, not a thing. I believe that firmly, that the only thing worth hiding is nothing, and we offered on behalf of the family to give him everything in our possession, but we wanted three things in return. And they're simple things. We wanted the wiring diagram of the car, we wanted Mr. Young's report, and we wanted the photographs which were taken by his agents at the early stages of the investigation. None of those are particularly difficult or arcane or difficult things for him to accede to. Mr. Nemeth's response to that was that he couldn't possibly give us the wiring diagram for the car, because each car virtually is made with a different wiring diagram, and they change in a matter of hours and days and minutes, and so that he wouldn't know which wiring diagram to give us, which again is a lie. It's a blatant lie, because that car has got a VIN number. That VIN number will be associated with the manufacturer, and they will know precisely which wiring diagram they used in that car. Because if that is true, if what Nemeth tells me is true, it would be impossible for anybody to fix an electrical fault in any Ford motor car, because you don't know which wiring diagram to use, you don't know which wire is what. So that's a piece of nonsense which Mr. Nemeth should have known better. The difficulty with this is that Ford seem to think that they can stonewall, that they can indulge in the kind of politics which happens in the American legal system, and try and stonewall everybody and try and avoid the truth. The truth is that there needs to be an inquest. Whether or not Ford have been interfering in the inquest process is a matter which will still become apparent, but the inquest is taking a remarkable length of time for something as important as this, and for something as simple as this to sort out at a proper inquest. Mr. Nemeth also claims that he's got witnesses, a policeman, who gave him information about the bullet hole. Now that in itself smacks at interference in the course of justice. It's very concerning that Mr. Nemeth and his cohorts have run off to find policemen who will make statements of this nature. And of course the simple thing to ask Mr. Nemeth is kindly provide us with a statement. And if it's merely idle gossip, then it is of no legal value whatsoever, no matter who says it. But the fact that Ford are interfering and talking to policemen about this may very well be construed as an interference with the course of justice, an attempt to pervert the course of justice, no less. So Mr. Nemeth has got a lot of questions to answer. Number one, why his version keeps changing from month to month, and the only clear direction is to exonerate Ford from any wrongdoing. Secondly, he needs to explain how he came by all the information. And thirdly, it would be a useful thing for Ford to explain to us why, in a matter of this importance, they chose to use somebody who would clearly, in my book, if I'd been examining him in first year, I would have failed him in first year forensic science. Why they should have used somebody of that ilk to examine the car, and why they are hiding the report of Mr. Anthony Young. Why don't they make Mr. Anthony Young available to everybody so that he can tell us what he found, and we can confront him with the affidavits as to what he said at the time. So all in all, we've got a situation which is unprecedented in my experience of 34 years, of a company the size of Ford behaving in an extraordinarily devious manner. In fact, it is so devious and so badly done to handle this public relations crisis in the way that they've done, that I'm quite confident of saying that this will become a textbook case of how not to handle a public relations crisis. The other thing which I'm very concerned about is that Mr. Nemeth should attempt to drag the church into this matter to cover up the sordid behavior of Ford Motor Company. And I'm very distressed that he feels it necessary to put the Archbishop in the firing line in order to lend some kind of credibility to what is Ford's undoubtedly devious and unbelievably bad position that they've taken with relation to this car.
Thank you. Obviously, we will take questions, and there will be some time afterwards for one-on-one interviews, although not too long. But just before we do start, I would just like, on behalf of the Press Club, to extend our sympathy to your family for this absolute horrific time that you must be going through. Can you imagine sitting and listening to this description of your nearest and dearest and have this attitude towards your family? I think it's appalling. Please accept our apologies. Right. You have the first question. Where are you from? And just state your name.
Thank you, Anton Meyer from Pretoria. Just in terms of the campaign.
All right, strong words there from forensic pathologist to the Jimmy family, Dr. David Klatzow, calling Ford extraordinarily devious. We heard from Reshall Jimmy's sister, Renisha, talking about rumours that she says Ford started, rumours that Reshall had been shot or had killed himself in the car before the car caught fire, and also hearing then from the family attorney, Rod Montano, saying that Ford's manipulation of the story has been absolutely horrendous, and this is what they've been dealing with. He also said that Ford has taken various steps to avoid liability. He then went on to quote the coroner's report, saying that in this report the cause of death was listed as severe charring, that there was no evidence of shooting, and that there was a large amount of soot in Reshall Jimmy's trachea, which shows he was alive when the car was being burnt. So he also spoke about the manner in which Ford has conducted themselves, and we heard that quite extensively there from Dr. Klatzow, talking about how Ford has removed cars so that they would avoid inspection. Also hearing from Dr. Klatzow talking about short circuits in the exact place where the fire would have started, which would have been the front of the car, whereas Ford has come out and said that the fire started at the back of the car.
Really one point in life, and that is to make as much money as possible and to hell with the cost to other people. So that would be my message to the buying public of South Africa. Probably quite a good motor car, Ford. Probably no worse than any of the other cars. But certainly the way in which the company's handled it can only be described as appalling, and needs to be contrasted with the way in which Honda acted in the fire which killed the nurse baby, where Honda acted properly, with immense sympathy, and with proper compensation.
Yes, your second question, and somebody over here has got the next one.
It's to you, Renisha. What would put this matter to rest for you at the moment? What would you want from Ford? Is it compensation? Just tell us what would finally put this matter to rest.
They need to take responsibility for Reshall's death. I think I've said this previously, nothing will bring Reshall back. But we have my mum at home, who Reshall was her breadwinner. And, you know, I don't know where it would go legally or what would happen. But for me, the main purpose of the campaign, of everything, is for Ford to take responsibility, because Reshall, what happened to him and in the manner in which he lost his life, I don't think any person deserves that, and especially the person he was. So I would want Ford to take responsibility, and then legal proceedings to, you know, take its course from there. But for me, responsibility is key, and to apologize to our family and say, we're sorry for everything we've done to your family in this past year and a half. Apologize for the suicide allegations, for him being murdered. They need to take responsibility, and that's key. I mean, they've put, my mum now had to be medicated, had to go to a doctor. She had a breakdown after that meeting. You know, I've told you bits and pieces of what happened, but there's a lot more detail to it. and it's left us now dealing with her emotionally falling apart because of Jeff Nemeth. So, yeah, that's...
Yes.
As far as I know, no charges have been brought against Ford.
Sorry, who are you? And who
Sorry, yeah, Ruben van Niekerk from Automobile Magazine.
Okay.
As far as I know, no charges have been made against Ford yet at the police or anything. Do you plan on doing that or not?
Potentially, there's an inquest, which is a criminal proceeding that is established to determine the cause of death. So Ford as yet is not the target of that investigation or inquest as such. The inquest is held, evidence is presented, the inquest magistrate or the inquest court would then reach a determination as to who in fact the blameworthy party was that is liable for the death. So should it progress to the stage that sufficient evidence is presented to the court that illustrates that in fact it was a fault relating to the Ford vehicle that led to his death, would then lead to criminal liability on behalf of Ford.
But in saying...
Sorry, and following on Anton's question, I mean, Ford tried to settle with you on Friday. Would you guys entertain another offer, or are you going to go with a counter offer and something that you settle it and it can be done and you guys can move on with your life?
Ultimately, I think we're looking for settlement from Ford. Obviously, it's a long, involved process. It is costly. It's bearing a very strong emotional burden on the family. Each of these sessions, each meeting, each discussion as to how Reshall died, the allegations that are made by Ford as to either a murder or a suicide or laying blame wherever they might find, keeps causing harm to the family and is very destructive to their emotional healing process, specifically relating to their mob. So from our perspective, if Ford is forthcoming and if Ford accepts responsibility, and just following up on your question to Renisha in terms of what in fact is she looking for. Unfortunately, our law provides for compensation. There is no other remedy. You cannot bring the person back, you cannot substitute a life. Compensation, which would be sufficient to equate to Reshall's earnings. He was on the up in his career. He in fact had interviews with Google in the UK lined up. He was the sole supporter of his mother. And obviously those financial aspects need to be catered for by Ford. It's a loss of support claim, damages relating to pain and suffering, loss of earnings. So there's various aspects that will be addressed in relation to that.
I know there's somebody behind there that wants to question the lady here asked first.
You've answered it.
Okay.
Good day, Barry Bateman, Eyewitness News. At what point do you move beyond talks and negotiations and initiate litigation? Thank you.
I think we're nearing that point. We were hoping in terms of Mr. Nemeth's undertakings that in fact he had a mandate to settle and was busy with the negotiating process. We were hopeful that everything would resolve itself in those terms. We are now in a position that the new CEO is being appointed, and I would assume that a new team is being appointed which hopefully would contact us and deal with us on that basis. Should we then, during initial negotiations, either get an indication from them that they are willing to entertain settlement negotiations, we would obviously pursue that avenue. If it's quite clear that they will continue in the same vein as what Nemeth and his team have continued, I think all doors are closed and we would then proceed with the necessary legal action against them.
Yes. The
Last
second,
question
your third
from my
question.
side.
Okay.
Is the National Consumer Commission still involved in this matter? Are they assisting you, or are they not part of this anymore?
They are part of it. The claims lodged in January. An undertaking was given by the NCC that within a 60-day working period, resolution and an indication as to the way forward, whether the matter would in fact be referred to the tribunal, would be forwarded to us. If memory serves, I think either last week or the week before, I in fact received correspondence from them that they have been corresponding with Ford and are awaiting their response to various allegations that have been levelled against them. So we now found ourselves effectively 5 months down the line from the lodging of all of those claims, and the NCC's answer to the whole problem and the resolution and the legal proceedings is that they are awaiting Ford's response. So my personal opinion, NCC has not been effective in dealing with the matter sufficiently, and it seems that Ford is leading them around and is tagging them along indefinitely and awaiting their response before they're willing to take any action against them.
Right, yes, back there.
Hi, I'm Sipo Magala for the Times newspaper. You mentioned that ultimately you are looking for a settlement from Ford, and this must be in the form of a fair or sufficient compensation. I don't know if you are able to tell us now, but are you able to say how much would be fair?
No, I don't think it's, prior to institution of proper legal actions and legal documents against Ford, obviously it entails quite a detailed financial process in terms of actuarial accounting, working out the specific earnings, etc., as well as adding legal aspects of pain and suffering, loss of support. So there's various aspects that need to be quantified. Obviously those will be investigated, and that would be framed in the form of a summons, which would then be issued upon Ford with the specific value which we are claiming from Ford, and would be quantified on that basis.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Fana Peter, SABC News. I'm asking the same question differently. Did you indicate to them that which would make a sufficient offer?
Yes. And that was the guise upon which they have been entertaining and tagging Renisha along for the past 2-month period. What Nemeth, as I understood, had told her is that he promises her that the offer that Ford is coming with will put her family at ease, it will take care of their mother financially, and they will have resolution to the matter, both emotionally as well as financially, and that she would have no worries subsequent to this. And the offer that we ended up was a Ford car. So quite insufficient.
Can you
and
ask what?
I
Another
think a Ford.
No,
A Ford, well, what they, no, not the same model. I think what they did indicate is that Renisha's mom could claim a vehicle up to a value of R1 million, any Ford of her choice. And they had the gumption then to tell Mr. Nemeth in his presence that neither of them would ever set foot in a Ford motor vehicle ever again in their life, understandably so, and that obviously that offer would not be entertained. And I think it's in fact insulting besides not being entertained.
So I must say the effrontery of making such an offer, it leaves me breathless.
I'd like to say it's not just verbally that he said he's got mandate to settle. I've got endless messages from Jeff Nemeth saying, I'm going to Detroit, I'm getting mandate to settle. I've come back, I've got mandate to settle. Before I leave this country, your family are going to close this chapter and start a new chapter, and I'm going to help you heal. And endless messages confirming in writing he's got mandate to settle. And the matter would be put to rest on that day when we met with him. I told him my mum is extremely vulnerable and she's not strong enough to meet you if you're going to say anything to her that's going to affect her regarding Reshall's death. And he assured me that him meeting my mum was to put her at ease and help her get closure of losing Reshall. So, yeah.
They are in fact bullying you.
Of course, I feel that he's used a vulnerable woman, bullied her, and targeted us on that.
Sorry, if I could just add something in relation to the question that related to the NCC. Quite a strange thing that Jeff in fact said to Renisha during this negotiation process is that he has been contacted by the NCC in order to obtain Reshall's post-mortem report from Ford, which the mind boggles.
So I've got that in a message as well. He sent me a message saying that, because we were meant to meet with the NCC, and he asked me to put that on hold until he meets with us. So I told him, look, they have requested certain documents from Rod, which he would like to share with them. And he said no, but the NCC has been in touch with him, and they've requested Reshall's post-mortem from him, which he shared with them. So I've just remembered that now, and that actually now is contradictory to him saying that he's not had sight of Reshall's full post-mortem, where he's then told me in messages that he shared this with the NCC. It's again a web of lies that he's sort of getting caught in, and
He
And-
obviously believes in the American way of alternative truths.
Quite clearly.
Yes.
Now, just to contextualize that, the post-mortem report is conducted by the state pathologist at the request of the SAPS, and such post-mortem report is in fact contained in the police docket. Now, that police docket is what exists in relation to the inquest that's going to be conducted in George. So, for the NCC to approach Ford to ask for that document is inexplicable and strange.
Yes, Antoinette.
Do you have a right for the inquest hearing date or how?
No, we've been corresponding with them. What we understand is the investigations were concluded approximately 3 months ago. The matter was then sent to the Director of Public Prosecutions in Cape Town. They had verbally undertaken to me, telephonically, that either they would issue, it is called Section 205 subpoenas, which are in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act to obtain certain information against Ford, specifically requesting Anthony Young's report and various other information from Ford. They had undertaken to do that with immediate effect. They then reneged on that aspect and have now indicated that they will set the matter down for inquest first, and during those proceedings would then subpoena the necessary documentation. That docket has now been with the DPP for a period of 3 months. And it seems as though nothing is progressing. It seems as though it's stalling, and no cogent reason has been forwarded as to why the matter has not been set down in court. And we are obviously following that up and trying to get an answer in that regard.
Yes.
It's Lorraine from ENCA. I mean, litigation can take a lot of years even. I read somewhere that you're giving Ford an ultimatum in terms of when they would reach suitable settlement that you guys were looking for. But you did allude to the fact that there is a change of, leadership at Ford itself. So are you waiting for that process to conclude before you can give some sort of an ultimatum? And also, from the family side, I mean, as you said, you really just want an apology from Ford. So when you were having all these exchanges, these SMSs, these WhatsApps with Mr. Nemeth, he never once apologized.
No, he didn't. He just spoke a lot about how he feels about, I've been open with the messages. I've shared them with Antoinette when we did our interview with the Times. After moving myself back from the situation and seeing what he's done, he basically manipulated me into feeling sorry for him. He spoke about how he's suffering, how his kids are suffering, how he believes in God, how he wants to make sure he gives us closure. Everything that he sort of said was leading to that meeting where we would get that apology, them taking acceptance, and us moving on. But he did not apologize at any point. It was just leading to this meeting that everything's going to happen. But in that 2-month period, he just kept on speaking about his emotion, his feelings, how he felt, and got my sympathy, which I sincerely believe that this man is trying to redeem himself and can see right from wrong and is trying to move forward from everything that's happened.
Clearly you were wrong.
I was.
If we could also just further contextualize that. I'm not sure of the exact date when Nemeth is supposed to leave, but on our understanding it's supposed to be the beginning of June. He's been involved in this negotiation process with Renisha for a period of 2 months, effectively now culminating on the Friday prior to the end of the month. So that effectively, while he's in South Africa and while he's accountable, we have a week to address the issues. Now, call it coincidence, and they might have a logical explanation for it. I think yesterday Renisha tried, as well as various reporters, tried to contact Jeff Nemeth on his cell phone number that he's used for the entire period he's in South Africa. It says that the number has been disconnected. I think we all read into the problems that Ford has probably anticipated, leaving Jeff Nemeth to effectively deal or try and resolve an issue. And Ford has then gone further to issue a statement that they do not wish to participate in any media activity. The matter is still pending in court, and that they offer no explanation and they offer no opinion. So I think the readership can read into the manner in which Ford has conducted itself and the time period and the delayed tactics used to a specific point up until he leaves the country. Now then, sorry, to move on to your point, the ultimatum, I think, was given not on a legal basis. I think that was in fact forwarded by SMS by Renisha to Nemeth. That was done subsequent to the meeting on Friday, and I think it was just done on the basis that should you have any true intention of trying to resolve the matter and you do have a proper settlement offer that you wish to offer, the ultimatum was then for Monday night, which has passed. So that by no means is a legal, is legally binding in any regard or was sent on a legal basis from our offices.
Right. Any more questions? I think we can wrap up. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for taking the time to come and clarify this. I think this is a very important matter to cover. And certainly all the stonewalling, I think it is then up to the media to give it all the support that they can. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
You know, one thing I'd like to say that Jeff Nemeth personally told me, and I have a message of this, he told me I should not entertain the media because you are opening our family wounds over and over again for your own purposes. And my response to him was, these are the people that have stood by my family, and the little justice that we could have gotten with Reshall's matter is because of the media. And, you know, I'd really like to thank all of you again on behalf of my family and my mum. You know, we appreciate everything and how you have assisted us in trying to get justice for Reshall. And in our meeting with Jeff Nemeth, I told him, you blame the media of opening wounds, and here are you who's damaged my mum and opened all wounds that could possibly have been opened from Reshall's matter. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to try and ask your names in order.
My name.
Full name.
Dr. David Clatsau. David Clatsau.
I'll give you.